In the last video we saw that when we can't do things in our heads easily, pen and paper can help us think better. But this doesn't mean that we shouldn't do things in our heads anymore, or that we can't use both approaches together. In fact, pen and paper can be seen as a special, more concrete example of one of the most powerful tools there is: visualization, the formation of mental visual images. Many successful people use it to their advantage, so let's look at this technique in greater detail. It's hard to talk about visualization and not start with Albert Einstein. He started using visualization when he was still a young man.
I was having the most wonderful thought. I imagined I was riding alongside a light beam.
And he had been using it throughout his scientific career and was sure that it helped him achieve his famous discoveries. Richard Feynman was another Nobel Prize-winning scientist who liked to visualize almost everything.
In the case of science, I think that one of the things that make it very difficult is it takes a lot of imagination. It's very hard to imagine all the crazy things that things really are like. I say that things jiggle, and if you're used to balls bouncing, you know they slow up and stop after a while. But we have to imagine with the atoms a perfect elasticity. They never lose any energy. Every time they bounce, they keep on bouncing all the time. They don't lose anything. They're perpetually moving. And that the things that happen when we say something loses energy, if a ball comes down and bounces, it shakes irregularly some of the atoms in the floor. And then when it comes up again, it leaves some of those atoms moving, the jiggling. So as it bounces, it's passing its extra energies, its extra motions, to little patches on the floor each time it bounces, and loses a little each time, until it settles down, we say, as if all the motion has stopped. But what's left is the floor is shaking more than it was before, and the atoms in the ball are shaking more than they were before.
But you can form these mental visual images for other purposes, and many successful people do exactly that. Alex Honnold is an American rock climber. He likes to free solo, that is, to climb alone and without protective equipment, sort of like in this photo. What was a big part of his preparation before his most famous climb?
And I think within preparation would fall, visualization, sort of a subcategory of imagining things that are otherwise unpracticable. I mean, particularly in the case of free soloing something where you're going to do a big climb once and probably only once, so you can't exactly practice it in the conventional sense of the word because it's something that's only going to occur one time. But thankfully, as humans, we can imagine, we can project ourselves, and forward and backward in time. You can think through the movements. You can even imagine the sensations, like what it will feel like under your skin, and so you can kind of experience that climb many times while still only doing it once. It's important for me to think about those kinds of things ahead of time so that when I'm doing the actual climb, it doesn't occur to me for the first time, like, oh no, what if my foot slipped? Or even not the actual visualization of falling to your death, but the imagining what it would feel like to get into a position and suddenly hesitate or worry that your foot's going to slip. Basically just to think through all those anxieties ahead of time so they're less likely to occur when it matters.
Michael Phelps, the most decorated Olympian of all time.
Getting up to a meet, I would visualize probably a month or so in advance, just of what could happen, what I want to happen, and what I don't want to happen. Because when it happened, I was prepared for it. Yeah. So, when I go into 2008 and in the 200 fly, my goggles fill up with water the first 25 and I swim blind for 175 meters, I revert back to what I did in training and counted my strokes. And I know how many strokes I take the first, second, third, and fourth 50 of all of my best 200 flies. So I reverted back to that, and I was ready for that because I was mentally prepared for it.
How does visualization help with that?
It is everything for me.
How so?
So if you're going to play an overseas tour, say to Australia or England or something like that, I literally sat down 2-3 months before, and I've made a decision in my head that I'm going to take their best bowler on.
And what specifically are you seeing when you're visualizing?
I'm actually seeing smashing that bowler all over the field. So I actually feel that emotion in my heart, and I can feel that this is going to happen. And you tune your head or you tune your mind in a way that it's so convincing in your mind that when you're in that situation, your body just takes over because it's already registered in your mind. And when that happens, you feel like, wow, man, this is so powerful. Because if something looks difficult, And if you don't convince yourself to go out there and achieve the opposite, you're never going to be able to do it. You can't just land in a place and say, I'll see what happens. That way your chances of succeeding become very, very low.
When we started talking about touring, I visualized ahead, okay, how are we going to do this? How do we reach the most people? How do we reach kids? And before you knew it, it was just a big thing.
So it seems that visualization can help with many thinking tasks: creativity, understanding, performance, planning, simulation. Why does visualization work? At least in the context of performance, we seem to have some answers.
People have done those studies where they've looked at sort of whether you actually physically practice, let's say on a keyboard, just because it's easier to sort of manage in a laboratory, versus just imagining sort of typing out that sequence. And just the act of physical visualization, of sort of imagination of that motor skill, it's about 50% as effective as physically performing it too. And it's 50% as effective, what I mean there is, in changing the plastic connections within the brain.
Whoa.
So even just visualization, passive play, as it were, still can actually cause a rewiring of the brain beneficially.
But can we get good at it?
You asked me if an ordinary person, by studying hard, would get to be able to imagine these things like I imagine. Of course, I was an ordinary person who studied hard. There's no miracle people. It just happens they got interested in this thing and they learned all this stuff. They're just people. There's no talent, a special miracle ability to understand quantum mechanics or a miracle ability to imagine electromagnetic fields that comes without practice and reading and learning and study. So if you say you take an ordinary person who's willing to devote a great deal of time and study and work and thinking and mathematics and time, then he's become a scientist.
How to practice visualization? One way to do it is with mental rotations. For example, which of the shapes on the right are rotations of the one on the left? You can also try visualizing more in your day-to-day life. For example, if you're going on holiday and you want to make sure that you packed everything, imagine yourself, your whole journey from home to your destination in as much detail as possible. What do you do step by step and what is needed? We will, however, have one very specific use case for visualization: building models. How do you do that? Have a look at this house that I was going to buy with all the YouTube money. Do you like it? What do you think about it? Would it be comfortable to live there? Now let's go through the photos again, but this time really try to visualize it. What does it look like? Which photos correspond to which rooms on the plan? As we are doing it, visualizing each photo in its correct place on the plan, we are building a mental model of the house in our heads. Because of that, we understand this house better. We are now able to ask more questions about it and also answer more things on our own. Actually, you also had to build a model in your head to answer the mental rotation question. You had to understand the properties of the shape on the left and how it would behave when rotated to find the correct answer. With the photos of the house, we moved from 2D to 3D, but the general principle goes much further than this. Hopefully, the more we practice, the faster we will be able to build such models in our heads, not only for visual data, but also when reading, listening to a lecture, or having a conversation with someone about the things that are important to us. Successful people really do that. One last example before we move on. Jacques Hadamard was a French mathematician who was also interested in the creative process of discovery. In his book, The Psychology of Invention in the Mathematical Field, he collected answers to questions about the habits of thinking of leading scientists of his time, including Albert Einstein. Here is an interesting quote by one of his respondents. Reading any work, I instinctively arrange the facts or arguments in some visual pattern, and I am as likely to think in terms of this pattern as I am to think in words. And the better the work suits such a pattern, the better it is understood. We will be returning to this concept many times.